Hi, everybody. My name is Brett Murfish, and I am the Director of Youth Justice at Texas Appleseed. We are a public interest law center, and one of the issues that we work on is youth homelessness. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know that everyone's probably had their fill of webinars and Zoom, but this is just such an important topic, and we so appreciate you joining us. Today, we hope that you'll learn about what McKinneyVento liaisons are doing during COVID to help students experiencing homelessness, especially as we head back to school. We have experts here to talk today about what they're doing to reach students and ensure they have the resources and the supports we need, that students need. So first, we'll hear from Jean Stamp. Many of you might have known her from Theo. She's now the Executive Director of the Homeless Education Network, Texas Homeless Education Network. And she'll talk about the responsibilities of McKinneyVento liaisons, as well as what money and funds they have at their disposal and how they can use those funds, what rules there are around them. And following that, we'll have a discussion with two liaisons, Norma Mercado from Bastrop ISD and Estella Garza from San Antonio ISD, about what they're seeing in their school districts, how they're helping to help students during this time. They're both seasoned liaisons, and I know that they'll provide a wealth of information and creative solutions that hopefully you can implement in your own districts. And after that, there'll be definitely time for a question and answer. So please do post your questions in the Facebook Live underneath the Facebook Live. We'll be able to see them and ensure they're answered. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Jean Stamp right now.
Okay, hi everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Some of our slides are quite dense, and obviously we won't be reading those and probably won't cover everything on each slide, but we wanted you to have this information as a reference once the webinar is over. So we're going to talk about the McKinneyVento Homeless Education Assistance Act during the time of COVID-19. And just for a little review for new folks to the Act, or for some of you who'd like a little bit of a review, we're going to discuss some pieces of that Act. Given the amount of time that we have for today's webinar, we won't be able to go over everything in the Act, but we will concentrate on identification, homeless liaison duties, and allowable uses of funds. And as you listen, please think about how your school district addresses each of the homeless liaisons' duties and how you'll be implementing them during this pandemic. So the Act itself was first passed in 1987. It was reauthorized by No Child Left Behind in 2000, and then again by the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. Frequently, we are asked if the Act is still in place during COVID-19, and the answer is yes, just as the provisions were in place during all of the hurricanes that we experienced in Texas. During natural disasters that even more negatively impact homeless students and students that are in poverty, it's more important than ever that the provisions in McKinneyVento be implemented. With virtual school being the norm for many of us this fall, you will want to think about how each duty surrounding homeless students' identification, enrollment, attendance, and school success can be implemented. And as Brett said, later in this presentation, you'll hear from two of our really great homeless liaisons about how they're doing that within their district. Remember that everything in this Act is aimed at improving educational outcomes for homeless students. So the Act requires that states and school districts, those are local education agencies, review and revise laws, regulations, policies, and procedures to remove barriers for enrollment, attendance, and school success for homeless students. The Act also provides the McKinneyVento education definition for homelessness as anyone who is not staying in a fixed, so stays in one spot, where people regularly go to stay, adequate, meaning that it's not overcrowded, there's electricity, there's heat, there's running water, it's not open to the elements, and it's not a safety hazard, and it's meant to be a nighttime residence. That's the basic definition. So with job closings, we're expecting to see even more families and students who will meet this definition. There are 4 housing situations that states have to report to the USDE. Those school districts must report to the state so that then they can report to the federal government. So the first one is shelter, anyone staying in shelters, the hotel motels, and of course these are the inexpensive ones, usually not in the best parts of towns or on busy freeways. In a doubled up situation, so these would be folks who have lost their housing due to economic or other hardship and they can't get permanent housing on their own. So maybe they have evictions on their records or incarcerations, or it's just job loss and they're unable to get their own housing, so they're having to stay with someone else. And then that 4th category is unsheltered. That includes a lot of people. It's people sleeping in cars, under bridges, bus stations, streets, and substandard housing. And remember again, substandard housing would be overcrowded and lacking heat, electricity, running water, those kinds of things. Most school districts use a student residency questionnaire to help them determine if the student is in a homeless situation. This can be paper or it can be electronic. But if electronic is used, the school district has to be sure that all families have the ability to access online in order to identify. So the district should ask what changes might be needed to implement identification during the pandemic. It may be that additional outreach is needed into the community to find students. It may be putting information out to community service providers, and it also may be having the information on the district website about how to do electronic identification. So there should be on all district websites information about the rights of homeless students. And then there should also be very easy access to how students and families in homeless situations can electronically enroll. One of the major requirements of the Act that we're going to talk a lot about is requiring a homeless liaison in every school district. Next slide, please. So these are some of the homeless liaison duties, at least the main ones. Homeless liaisons may not do all of these themselves, but they must ensure that they're done within their district. So working with campuses is very important, maybe even having liaisons on each campus that then works with the homeless liaison for the district is very important. And again, implementation may be a little more complex during the virus. So the first one we want to talk about is outreach into the community to actually find homeless students. And that might be by attending community meetings. Some of those may be virtual to start with, but you're talking to other service providers and giving them a heads up about the education definition and how to refer to the school district. Placing posters and brochures into the community. We certainly would want those at the shelters, in the lobbies, at hotels, motels, at convenience stores, fast food stores, and also making sure that they're in that front office on every single campus. We should have this information on every website as well. So identification has to be a primary activity of each district. And building relationships with community agencies to help you do identification is a very helpful thing. This act requires immediate enrollment, even if the student doesn't have the usual documents and records, including immunization records, proof of residency, parent or legal guardian for an unaccompanied youth, birth certificate. So homeless students can enroll without all of that. So if you're doing online enrollment, there has to be a way to bypass all of those documents, because many homeless families kind of get stuck with, well, I can't register because it's asking me to send in, you know, utility bill to show proof of residency, et cetera, and I don't have that. So we have to make sure if it's electronic that we can bypass those things. And again, website information is really important. School selection is actually the heart of the McKinneyVento Act. The intent is to keep students stable in one school, even if they have to move around a lot. School stability results in better academic outcomes for homeless students, and students in homeless situations have a right to select their residency zone school or their school of origin. And the school of origin is defined as the school they were attending when they became homeless, or the last school they attended, which covers when families become homeless in the summer months. So going virtual shouldn't cause issues unless it's things like devices or hotspots for school of origin. But when we're starting to get students back in school and we're looking at social distancing, particularly for school of origin transportation, that may take a little bit of doing. So looking at those bus routes and the number of students. It's the parent or the unaccompanied youth's decision about whether they want to go to the school of origin or the school of residency. But school districts can make a best interest determination. It has to be based on student-centered factors such as educational needs, the age of the student, the ability to have a long bus ride or meet that bus early in the morning. So while a senior might not mind making an hour bus ride each way to be in school with their friends and to graduate with their friends, it might not be in the best interest for a young student. So students that have to meet the bus very early may face the day tired and sluggish and have difficulty attending. Those would be considered student-centered factors. If the parent or the unaccompanied youth and the school don't agree about the best interest determination for which school to attend, there is an official dispute resolution process that can be implemented. So the dispute claim has to be submitted in writing, responses have to be in writing. The process works its way through the school district's administration and the school board, and the last arbiter is TEA. Once TEA decides on this issue, it can't be redisputed that year or even the next year unless the fundamental facts of the issue have changed in some way. So forms and details about this can be found on the TEA website or the TASB website. That's the Texas Association of School Boards website. Then homeless students automatically are eligible for free school lunch, meaning they don't have to complete the paperwork to do an income qualification. They're also automatically eligible for Title I services, whether they're on a Title I campus or not. The expectation is that homeless students in Texas won't be guided to the basic diplomas. They will be able to graduate with recommendations and endorsement diplomas and be prepared for post-secondary work. And for unaccompanied homeless youth, they must be told of their right to be able to complete the federal application for student aid, the FAFSA, as an independent student. So that means they don't need their parents' or guardians' financial information or tax records. Again, that's for unaccompanied homeless students. And there are several different pots of funding that homeless students that are there to meet homeless students' needs. So the next slides will address these fundings. So next slide, please. All right, so Title I Part A set-asides. These were changed a little bit in the ESSA reauthorization. So the set-asides are only for use for homeless students, and they're required of all school districts. That was a change with ESSA, whether they're all Title I campuses or not. And they can be used on both Title I campuses and non-Title campuses. The amount of the set-aside and the activities funded by the set-aside should be based on a needs assessment that the school district does. So the set-asides can be used for services that are comparable that other students are receiving, but it also can be used for services that only homeless students receive. So homeless students have to receive at least as much, but they can also receive more, and these funds can pay for that. So a comparable service might be an after-school tutoring program, and in order for homeless students to attend, maybe transportation would have to be paid for. But for a homeless student only service, maybe an example would be providing hotspots for online learning for the homeless student only. The funds can now pay for all or part of the homeless liaison salary, and it can also pay for the excess cost of school of origin transportation. The funds cover pre-K through 12, and that's a little bit of a change too, for any educationally related support services for homeless students. So the homeless liaison should be in on the planning for how much funding to be set aside in Title I and what those funds will be used for. All right, next slide, please. So here's the list of items the funds can be used for. Most are self-explanatory. We wanted you to have these for reference, but I'm not going to talk about each one. I'm just going to address a couple of them that maybe need a little extra information. So when we're talking about food, we're talking about such things as emergency food, like sending a backpack full of food home with a student for the weekend, or snacks at a parent meeting or an after-school program, that kind of food. Many times we see counseling services paid out of Title I set-asides, usually regarding trauma counseling, as that is a specialty counseling mostly available in the community rather than within the school. Also noteworthy in this list is fees for GED testing. In that, it is the only thing that Title I can pay for the parents of a homeless student as well. So not only for the homeless student, but also for the parent of the homeless student. So generally speaking, you can't use these funds to pay for the clothing for the parent of a homeless student, or if it's the homeless student is a teen parent, you couldn't pay for baby clothes or diapers or things like that out of Title I, unless that child was in an early childhood program enrolled in the district. So for more information about what you can use the funds for, look at the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth website that we have listed here. Also, this information is on the additional websites that we're going to identify later in this webinar. So next slide, please. All right, I hope I'm not going too fast, but if I am, please ask any questions that will clarify what we're talking about. So there is McKinneyVento sub-grant funding that comes from the federal government, and it's run through the State Education Agency, TEA for Texas. So website where you can find some of the information is listed here. TEA administers the 3-year competitive grant cycle. The application requires school districts to put in homeless data, a needs assessment, and a service activities plan to meet those needs. TEA must approve the award of the subgrant to qualifying school districts and education service centers. All expenditures of these funds must be approved by TEA. That includes any kinds of amendments that have to be approved by TEA. For instance, sometimes subgrant programs have identified an activity like running an after-school tutoring program, and then we have the virus hit and everything goes virtual. So the program may need to shift that activity to purchasing devices and hotspots for homeless students. The subgrant program could submit an amendment to change the activities it's funding, but it does need TEA approval. McKinneyVento subgrant funds cannot be used for housing or housing-related costs, such as rent assistance, utilities. These funds might be available elsewhere in the community through the CARES Act or through the Housing Urban Development. It's important that homeless liaisons know their community resources and track federal and state financial provisions. So as we're talking, I think you're getting the idea of just how many things that a homeless liaison needs to do. They have to have a lot of information about the departments within their school district, as well as what's going on in the community and where funding is that will meet the needs of their students and families. Next slide, please. So other sources of funding might include Comp Ed, which funds services to the 13 at-risk categories, and students experiencing homelessness are on that list. Other departments within the district might have funds, such as special education. So many times a special education student has as part of their IEP transportation, tutoring, or even basic needs. If that's in their IEP, that's a way of getting those things for homeless students without having to tap into Title I set-asides or McKinneyVento funds. When you are tapping into other department funds that help stretch the McKinneyVento dollars, and it provides more comprehensive services for a student. Next slide, please. All right, these next 4 slides are really pretty dense. And again, we wanted you to have them. This is the list of the 16 federally allowable costs identified in the McKinneyVento program. And we want you to have that for your later reference. I'm not going to talk about all of them. So I just want to highlight those that need a bit of explaining. So all McKinneyVento funds are meant to supplement rather than supplant currently used funds. That's the case generally with most federal dollars. So if something's already being paid for, say you have a tutoring program that's being paid for already out of a different pot, you couldn't decide, well, we're going to use our McKinneyVento dollars for tutoring now, and whatever funds we were using before, we're going to do something else with. You can't supplant those funds. They're meant to assist a homeless student to access services needed to be able to enroll in, regularly attend, and be successful in school. Any resources that improve academics, such as tutoring, fee-based classes, supplemental classes before, after school, that sort of thing, is allowable as an expenditure, as is funding evaluations and assessments to identify needs and to identify where needed resources are. Funds can be used for professional development of school district staff, because all school district staff must be trained and they must know how to identify and serve homeless students. Next slide, please. So these funds can be used for paying the excess cost of school of origin transportation, just as we said the Title I set-asides could be, including pre-K and feeder pattern schools. We get a lot of questions about this issue. Some school staff say, well, we don't provide transportation for any student in pre-K. Do we have to do so for homeless students? And the answer is yes, to and from school of origin. So if the homeless student is attending their attendance zone school, the McKinney-Vento Act doesn't require transportation unless it is a comparable service offered to all students, or unless transportation is such a barrier as the student cannot attend unless the school provides it. In order for school of origin transportation to kick in, the preschool student would need to be enrolled in a campus. Then due to their homeless situation, they have to move out of the attendance zone or even out of the district. The student must receive transportation services if the parent chooses for their student to return to their school of origin. But remember, again, the school can do a best interest determination if for some reason they think this isn't feasible for the child, right? It's not that it's not feasible for the school. So it doesn't take into things like, well, it's inconvenient for the school to do it. We don't do it for other pre-K kids. We'd have to go out and buy car seats, or we'd have to install seat belts somewhere, and we don't want to do that. That can't be a reason for a best interest determination. It has to be based on student-centered factors for students. So also, feeder pattern schools are included as of ESSA reauthorization. It used to be that the school of origin was a brick and mortar building, and once a student left that building, they lost their school of origin. But with ESSA, that's changed now. So when a student who's homeless is moving from elementary to middle or middle to high school, that feeder school then becomes their school of origin, and they have a right to choose it and to have transportation to and from that school. So again, with COVID, there may be some issues that come up with how this is going to happen on a bus, how we're going to do social distancing for those students that are going to choose that. Early childhood programs can be paid for out of McKinney-Vento dollars. And that is if they're not being already paid for by federal, state, or local dollars. Remember, there is no supplanting of funds. So in Texas, school districts must provide a 4-year-old pre-K. Homeless students automatically qualify for 4-year-old pre-K, meaning they don't have to do an income or other qualification, and they must be enrolled immediately, no wait list for 4-year-olds. The school district may provide a 3-year-old pre-K. Homeless students, again, automatically qualify, and they must be prioritized for enrollment, but if all the slots are full, they can be placed on a wait list. For both 4-year-old and 3-year-old homeless students, school of origin and school of origin transportation are their rights. So private Head Start are those programs that are not administered through a public school entity. They must prioritize homeless students. They can save spots for anticipated homeless student enrollment, but homeless students can be placed on a wait list. So Head Start, private Head Start, and 3-year-old pre-K, there can be a homeless student on a wait list. Homeless students do not need to complete an income qualification or any other kinds of paperwork that would be qualifying for that program. McKinney-Vento funds can pay for any service comparable to those that other students receive in order to improve identification, enrollment, attendance, and academic success, but also homeless students can receive services that not all students have. So supplemental tutoring academic programs just for homeless students are allowable. All right, next slide, please. Okay, So tracking and obtaining and even paying for documents for enrollment is an allowable cost. And in Texas, we have an electronic system called TREX. In order for the records to be sent within the legal 10 days that's required by law, the previous school has to keep those records in pretty complete order. So when we see delays, it's usually that the previous school is trying to gather the records together. So it's really better to do that as they go. Educating parents on their children's McKinneyVento rights is an allowable cost. So doing meetings, snacks for the meetings, staff time, et cetera, is all an allowable cost to be paid for out of these funds. Coordinating services both within the school district and between school districts and community service providers is allowable. Next slide, please. McKinneyVento funds may be used for violence prevention programs and counseling. So that could be such things as dating violence, domestic violence, youth violence, et cetera. And these may be community programs. So it doesn't have to be a program that's put on within the school. It could be a community program that the school district is helping to fund. So funds may be expended for supplies for non-school facilities. And we usually see this when a school district might try to set up a tutoring or a homework room in a shelter. That could also include helping with getting furniture, shelving, technology devices, computer lab, or other school supplies, and tutors and teachers. So those are allowable expenditures. And besides shelters, other programs such as a Boys and Girls Club that has an after-school program might receive supply funds from the school district with their McKinneyVento funds. The only caveat for these funds is that they are used for homeless students. So remember that any student that's in a shelter is automatically homeless, but it might not be that every student at the Boys and Girls Club is homeless. So they might have to do a proration of certain things in that instance. Emergency services for homeless students are also allowable, and that could be things like physical or mental health services. It's always wise to document these types of services, that they're not available from any other source in the community, and therefore the funds need to come from McKinneyVento. These funds cannot be used, just like Title I, for housing or housing-related services such as deposits or utilities. Now, while these are allowable expenditures, this group of 16, under the federal law, all these expenditures have to be approved by TEA because remember, these are part of the McKinneyVento subgrant expenditures. Next slide, please. All right, here are a number of helpful resources. The National Center for Homeless Education is the guidance arm for the U.S. Department of Education on homeless issues. Really good website with a lot of information. Schoolhouse Connection hosts a website with a myriad of helpful briefs, white papers, guidance, a lot of data by state also there. TEA has a number of helpful documents, of course, on their TECHI website, including some very helpful documents on COVID-19. One of the most helpful resources with the U.S. Department of Education is the non-regulatory guidance document written in a question and answer format. And it's really easy to find a topic that you want some information on and find the answer to it in that document. So I really encourage you to go in and just download that document and have it. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Brett to do our roundtable discussion with our homeless liaisons. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jean. That was great. And there have definitely been some questions for you already. I'll answer just a couple housekeeping things before move into the roundtable discussion. So yes, the slides will be shared. We'll go ahead and email those if you register through the Eventbrite link. And if you missed something that Jean said already, not to worry. The webinar is being recorded and it should be viewable on Facebook for a long time. So you can also send it to friends who might have had a conflict. And then I know there were some content questions for Jean and we will have time to come back to those. So don't worry, they will be answered later, but I wanted to go ahead and move into our the rest of our presentation, which is a roundtable discussion. And it is going to feature 2 liaisons. And we're gonna go through some of the issues that they have been seeing. So the first, well, they're going to talk at the same time, but I'm just going to briefly introduce them. So Norma Mercado is the homeless liaison with Bastrop ISD, and she's been doing that for at least 4 years. But she has 18 years working with the at-risk population, and she has a master's in social work. And during COVID, she got a puppy to make 3 dogs in her house. And then our other liaison who's going to join us is Estella Garza. And Stella is the homeless liaison with San Antonio ISD, and she's had that role. But it's really, when I say homeless liaison for both Norma and Estella, as you all probably know, it's not just homeless liaison. It has a lot of other responsibilities. And Estella heads up a team at San Antonio ISD since 1995, which she thinks makes her sound like she's been there forever. But 1995 was not that long ago. As you might know, that was when Waterworld came out with Mel Gibson. I think we can all remember that. And she has gotten into cooking, because what else is there to do during COVID? So you can see them now on your screen, and we're going to go ahead and talk about some issues. Just as a brief overview, we're going to talk about identifying homeless students, school of origin, which Jean touched on, transportation, access to technology, school and hygiene supplies, as well as food and tutoring and academic supports. And then we will have hopefully a generous amount of time for questions so that we can cover whatever is happening in your district. So we'll go ahead and start. You know, homeless student identification has been something that is always a challenge, even in a time when students are coming to school. But now it is a different task and has its own unique challenges. So I'm going to start with Estella. And Estella, could you talk to us about some of the new strategies you're employing to identify students?
Sure. Certainly it is a difficult task since we are all virtual. However, we have started working with our enrollment offices. There's electronic enrollment. I think this is our 3rd year in doing so. And in doing so, then in communicating with that office, then we're able to get a spreadsheet of information of people who have registered, who have indicated in some fashion, way, or form whether they are in a possible doubled up situation, homeless situation, a shelter. So we have a good group, or a good file to go through, which is going to take time. Some of the things that we've been bumping into as we make our phone calls is that families are very, very stressed and very traumatized as a result of this virtual setting. They don't have the direct support from the school as they did before, that they could just walk in and get help. Now it's all virtual. So they're feeling the stressors, and as the social workers are making their phone calls, sometimes, their phone calls could last an hour because they have so much to talk about with regards to their issues at home. Based on our phone calls, then a quick survey was done about last week. Out of about 100 phone calls, 50% of them are in homeless situations. And this is just the people that we could garner from our enrollment offices. We're also looking at a variety of other methods of trying to find them or identify these people. We all know that the rental moratorium is now over. Their non-eviction is over as of July 31st. And so we know there's a lot of people that are going to be evicted. We did call our eviction court here in Bexar County, and we got very, very preliminary information, but there are in the hundreds of people in Bexar County that are going to be evicted soon. We also know that a lot of our parents are in hotels. So we are calling the hotels again so that we can put posters out there so that our parents will know where to call for assistance. We are working with our shelters currently. We have a lot of shelters in San Antonio ISD area, and youth shelters as well as family shelters. And so the contacts there, our numbers are going up. We've been able to identify a lot of kids so far. I know we're going to continue to do so, but we're looking at all different kinds of ways in trying to identify these families. It used to be that by now we would be getting a lot of phone calls because, again, of the isolation of our parents. You know, they're so traumatized, things like that, that we're finding out that it's difficult for them to be able to think the way they used to think in past years. Okay, it really is.
Thank you so much. I think there was a lot of great new strategies in there. And Norma, do you have anything to add about what you're doing in Bastrop ISD?
Yes, very similar to Estella as well. We are a rural school district, so one of our biggest challenges, like I know many of you are encountering, is a lack of internet or Wi-Fi access, lack of computers. So we definitely been working closely with our city leaders, advocating. We've had a couple of meetings about the need for broadband, and I know there's a community-wide survey now so that we can really truly see the need across the county for broadband. And then, because really when it's something like that big, you need to involve also the city leaders and advocate for what's happening with students and how it's affecting them not having these resources. Another thing that we did, in order to keep in touch with our unaccompanied youth and our some of our homeless families was providing them with the phone and data card so that we could stay in touch. We couldn't use McKinneyVento funds for that. But we were able to use FEMA funds because it was an emergency. These are the families who didn't have a way to keep in touch, and they needed to communicate with their teachers. It was a way for us to stay in touch with them and to update their school information. So we were able to deliver those phones and data cards, and we've been able to stay in communication that way. Like Stella said, we delivered posters to all the community agencies. We've also did a presentation with our mental health authority, especially because we saw an increased number of runaways. So that way they knew if they had a runaway, they could also reach out to me. We can figure out a plan for this youth. We do not have a youth shelter in Bastrop County. So usually students end up doubled up with friends, with other families, or they look for shelters in other cities. Like I know there's connections in New Braunfels and Austin for LifeWorks. What else have we done? So,
well, Norma, there were two things that you highlighted that were specifically around identifying students. One was a video training and one was delivering food boxes. Can you talk about those things?
Yeah, so one of the biggest needs, when we knew we weren't going to come back for spring break, I knew I had to figure out a way to communicate with families. And because I know that resources are limited in our county, I started calling families and getting permissions to add them into our Remind 101 messages. And then we were able to figure out where the gaps was with other church leaders and the current food distribution sites. So we were able to identify where we needed to add more distribution sites. And also we had a lot of families that did not have a way to get to the sites. So we were able to deliver meal boxes once a week. We delivered meal boxes. And also, what was your other question?
Well, we were just talking about identifying students. And I think what you said is that when you delivered food boxes to kids who were in quarantine, you were able to identify if they were homeless by seeing exactly where they were living.
Yeah, so we started getting a lot of calls and families sign up for meals delivery. And when we would deliver the boxes, we would identify substandard living conditions, or we would see a lot of children in one small house. So we identified more people delivering boxes. Same thing with our truancy officers as they did home visits. They were able to identify more students for us. And I also, what was really helpful was I created a short video for teachers. It was a 7-minute video just telling teachers some of the signs and symptoms of homelessness, because teachers are communicating with their students. So it was important that they were aware of signs of homelessness, so that if the student mentioned something like, oh, we don't have a place to stay right now, or we have a lot of people in our home. So, and So this helped teachers also identify more students, and I did see an increase in referrals by teachers after that video.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think one of the things that we're starting to see is sort of what strategies are we using and which ones might we use when things return to normal. And I think a video training that, has more people aware of the signs of homelessness is certainly one of those strategies. Estella, I know that we talked a little while ago about school of origin and transportation, and I think a few weeks ago you told me that it was still too early to talk about transportation because things were still in flux. So I'm wondering if that's still the case, and if you could talk about even if we haven't figured it all out, which I'm sure there's a lot to figure out, if you could talk about some of the problems that are coming up in a kind of COVID transportation back to school world. Oh wait, I think you're on mute.
San Antonio ISD is going virtual for the first 3 weeks. And so we don't have the immediacy of transportation on Monday when we get started. But it's certainly conversations that I need to start having. I know that the transportation department has already created social distancing within the bus. They're going to mark bus seats, things like that, information to the kids based on households and individual kids on their own as to where to sit. And so based on that, then obviously the bus is going to get full really fast. So I'm still yet to have conversations with our transportation department. Once we begin to see and start getting people who want to stay in the school of origin, we do have kids already who do want to stay. So that's a topic of conversation that is coming up very, very soon as to how it's going to work. Because obviously within San Antonio, there are 17 different school districts, and we in San Antonio know the issues of transporting cross district among all the different school districts here. And so yes, we all know that we're going to be running into some issues. So it's not only within SEISD, but it's also with the 16 other school districts to connect with.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Norma, if you didn't have anything to add, I was going to move on to access to technology, which I know you have a lot to say about. Did you have anything that you wanted to add about transportation and Bastrop ISD?
No, we're pretty much the same, Brett. We're still kind of trying to figure it out. I think the challenge is some districts start at different times and trying to figure out who's transporting when. That's really a big challenge that we're going to have, is because everyone's starting at a different time, different hour. So that's what I've seen as well.
Yes, and so we'll just, Norma, if you'll just stay on. I was going to talk about, access to technology, I think is always a topic for, an issue for homeless students, right? It's their main way of communicating, their way of having some kind of constancy. But obviously now with virtual learning, it has a new kind of level of importance. So I wanted you to, I know you talked a little bit about some of the things you did, but if you could talk about more about, what the district's going to do ongoing to help students who might not have ready access to technology.
I know the district has ordered more computers and hotspots to be able to supply students. But we also got, because again, we can, with the grant, we can only supplement, you can't supplant. I had to ensure, kind of also ensure that I'm speaking with other departments to see what they were doing. So Title I program, the federal program director indicated that they were going to order hotspots and more computers. So one of the needs that we have right now is access to internet at the family shelter. We have a family shelter that has 10 tiny homes, and they don't have access to internet. So we were able to partner with Cap City Kids, and they will be donating hotspots for every tiny home to ensure students in the shelter have access to internet.
Nice.
So it's really working with other community leaders to meet the needs, because even with ordering all the hotspots and technology, that's, you still have to, there's always a need in the shelters. And the children move there so quickly that it was important that the shelter has with this internet for when the students are there.
That's so great. I know that, finding community partners is sometimes part of your job when there might not be the right or adequate funding. And I know Estella can talk about that too, and especially with access to technology. So Estella, can you talk about that in San Antonio ISD a little bit?
Sure. San Antonio ISD has purchased many computers and hotspots because they were able to find funding to be able to do this. Then of course the grant money didn't kick in for the homeless kids. So they identified or they dispersed all of these computers out in the area. Some people, yes, had difficulty because of where they were in a low-lying area, whatever hotspots were issued out. The idea also of the quantity of kids in one house bumping into a hotspot, then how are they going to do it to be able to, is it enough? Is it, and I don't know the technology language, is one hotspot going to be able to serve 4 or 5 computers? Connectivity. And so the school district did partner with VIA, which is our local metropolitan transit system. VIA was able to park some buses close to, in huge apartment complexes in order for the children to bump into the Wi-Fi from the VIA bus. We also have our buses that are Wi-Fi accessible, and they were made available in different spots throughout the district. The San Antonio Spurs opened up their parking lot, their arena, and social distanced the spaces in order for parents to come in, park their vehicles, and have their kids pop into their Wi-Fi. So there was a really strong push in the springtime, in the late spring, to do this. I know that the city has also been talking about the issues of the Wi-Fi infrastructure in the city, and which are the kids that don't have it more so than others. So I know the city is trying to look into expanding Wi-Fi capabilities in the inner city area within the city limits. And so they're looking at that also. So I'm thinking that in the fall, we will have more varieties of ways of having the kids tap into Wi-Fi. Certainly there always is more that's needed in a situation like this.
Absolutely. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but I think we're going to just hit a couple more of these topics. Let's actually try and roll these into one, although I know they're different. And so school supplies, clothing and hygiene, and meals. And so if we could try and do both of those, I'll start with you, Norma. If you want to talk about, I know that that's something that maybe school would have been the distribution point for, and now things are a bit more complicated. So if you don't mind talking about those buckets of supplies and what you're doing.
Yeah, so the school district has its own back to school bash that happened as a drive-through event. In addition to that, we have a distribution event only for McKinneyVento homeless and foster care students, and we call that the Empowerment Academy. We just had that on Tuesday. So we call each family, get them registered for the event. And when they come, it was also a drive-through again, and we provided them resources, school supplies. They were able to pick up some meals. And we partner with that also with Cap City Kids, and then also for McKinneyVento funds to purchase the supplies. And when students go back to in-person September 8th, they will have additional supplies, because I know sometimes at home things get lost or they're using it. So we're going to provide them with additional school supplies if they need that for going to in-person. And for students in shelter, we're also providing shoes, like if they need a couple of outfits for school so that they're ready to attend in-person classes.
Something else, but like we were mentioning, if those options are not available for the student.
Sorry, I was muted that time. That's
Okay.
great. I was going to ask you, Norma, if you could talk about the sources of funds, like for meals. Are you using the McKinney-Vento grant at all for that? And And how are you partnering with the local food pantry, just so that people can come back to the funding? Are you leaving? Is it too loud wherever you are? Are you going to give us a campus tour? No, I'm just kidding. You can just talk about the funds and how you're doing that. I think that might be helpful, and then we'll hear from Estella.
Yeah, so for, of course, the school district provides meals for students, but also we partner with the local food pantry, and we provide the Nibbles program. So students who have a need for additional food on the weekends, the food pantry helps us put together backpacks, and those are sent on Friday, so the children have extra meals on the weekend. And we also have, for the food pantry, the third Thursday of every month at our school district, we distribute bags of groceries for families that need additional food. And then we also partner with the local shelters, and we provide the students some snacks for when they're doing their homework and they need extra snacks like granola bars, waters. So we do partner with them also to provide what the students will need while in the shelter.
Okay, thanks so much. Estella, could you talk about those things as well?
Sure. Meals, our food services just put out today their locations that are going to be distributing meals throughout our district. They normally pick some schools, some large complexes, apartment complexes where they can park and distribute. And so that's what they did in the fall or in the spring. And so now with their release this morning that I'm still needing to look at, see what it's going to look like, but I'm sure it's going to have a lot of similarities to that. We're also looking at putting in a food pantry in one of our schools. We're in the midst of getting support. Cap City Kids also came in with some support for it. We're looking to be able to put it in place in order to be able to start with the campus parents there, but then also looking at it from the greater district, is what the need is. We're going to kind of use this as a pilot to see what evolves from it, to see looking at possible expansion into other feeder schools or other feeder pattern schools. We've got 7 comprehensive high schools, and so everything fits under them. So we're looking at that. With regards to school supplies, yes, we're looking at it. We do have supplies ready. We're trying to figure out from a social distance perspective how we're going to do this. We do have our population is pretty compact, unlike Bastrop and the rural area. So we're really looking at the issues of following the CDC regulations in trying to get this out and distribute it. So we're still needing to kind of do some brainstorming where that's concerned. However, we're looking at it to see how it can be done. Uniforms, right now, we're moving to an electronic application for uniforms, school uniforms. So, that should be easier to be able to process, to actually get them to the campuses. Then, we can deliver to the campus, have them ready for the parents there. We're thinking about a lot of different kinds of ways how it can work out. Yes, shoes, coats, winter coats. I mean, there's so many things already in the midst of trying to put into place so that we can get this kind of things moved out to our parents.
I know when we spoke before, one thing that you mentioned is that there was a modification that you were allowed to use 15% of the McKinneyVento grant for groceries and toiletries and hygiene. Yes,
that is coming in with the new grant year for 2021. So, yes, I did set aside the 15% of the total grant specifically for that. So we're looking, the funding doesn't kick in until we get the NOGA September 1, okay? So we still have another few weeks to be able to look at that, see how we're going to put it into place in order to be able to get some actual purchasing going for the parents' needs with regards to hygiene items, food, soaps, things like that.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do the question and answer. I want to leave time. So if you're on Facebook Live and watching this, please go ahead and post your questions. I know we've already gotten some. I was going to try and answer, I think some of them are for Jean, but while Jean is transitioning back, Norma and Estella, one question that came through was, are you engaging with your Continuum of Care's coordinated entry or coordinated access process? And if so, how? So I don't know, if does one of you, Estella, you're nodding. Do you want to go ahead and start with that?
Yes, sure. I've been involved with the Continuum of Care for quite a few years, okay? And the involvement with them, we have the youth, the unaccompanied, the youth homeless group, and there's a lot of work being that has been done there. We have our co-chair people from
Oh wait, I think you just hit the mute while you were talking. We missed you after co-chair people.
Okay, we've got two co-chair people for the youth committee, and that's Region 20 as well as Northeast that are involved. We recently received a grant from the federal government for the youth homelessness demonstration grant. And so there's a lot of efforts right now in putting into place with regards to servicing our youth, our homeless youth. We're also looking at, they've also developed an eviction Q&A in order to be able to help support some of our families who are going through the process, and how is it that we might be able to tap into legal supports for them, considering where we are today with COVID. As a member of the board, then we're also looking at expanding some of the outreach for homelessness and redefining some of the issues related to homelessness. And so there's a lot of movement with the Continuum of Care.
That's great. Norma, did you want to add anything about your experience to that?
Yes, so I currently am part of the Texas Homeless Network board as representing our youth homeless. And I have to say that I continue to advocate for the need for McKinneyVento liaisons to have access to the HMIS data system so that we're able to help families into the system when they're seeking rapid rehousing services. So, but I do work closely with the program because often we serve the same population. So they're always referring families to me, or I link them to their services for rapid rehousing services.
Great. Norma, there's been a couple requests to have the video that you put together shared. So I want to make sure, but you're okay with that going out to the attendees, is that right?
Yes, I
okay.
have emailed already. You're more than welcome to share it. They do have to download it to hear the voice over it.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and send that at the end of the webinar. So Jean, a question for you came in. For student and families that are still qualifying for McKinneyVento and have been McKinneyVento since last school year ended, can they choose their school of origin? The person gave an example. They became McKinneyVento in the spring of 2020 and chose to stay at their school of origin, even though their new address is outside of that zone. Now we're still in the same situation here at the start of the school year. So can they still choose? So I think that they elected in spring, and now the question is, can they continue?
Absolutely. As long as they're still homeless, they still have that right. That school of origin right does not go away until the incidence of homelessness goes away. So they do have that from school year to school year if they're still homeless.
Okay. A question for everyone, I think. What happens to McKinneyVento students during school closures, holiday breaks, and summer breaks? Are they still eligible for assistance, or is there a break in coverage? Norma, do you want to talk about that? I know that you've been helping students over the summer.
Yeah, so I work throughout the summer. So I often in the summer get a lot of students that are going into college, reach out for assistance with their FAFSA applications, getting into college, getting supplies ready for college. So I help students throughout the summer, but I work in the summer. So I know some homeless liaisons are off in the summer, so that might be different for them. But for me, I feel like I never really stop. I keep going, and homelessness does not stop in the summer and during the breaks. It actually increases. it's kind of like, usually emergencies always happen between, they don't, after 5 and on the weekend.
Right.
How homelessness is really doesn't ever go away.
So if there's a school where the homeless liaison isn't doing the Norma Mercado and working all summer, those students still have access, right? And if so, who should they contact? Do you have a sense of that? Maybe Jean might know.
Well, they definitely have the rights, those
Right.
continue over the summer. And, you know, what kinds of services that are offered really varies from school district to school district. So if there's a summer school, those kids have rights to summer school. They have rights to anything the school district is offering to another student over the summer. And then, of course, with enrollment in the fall. But, you know, it does vary from school district to school district what they're doing over the summer. So some it isn't dependent upon whether the homeless liaison works or not. It really is just dependent upon what the school has available over the summer.
Got it. And I guess it would be the district, really, right?
Yes.
Yes,
right.
yeah, the district's offices are open during the summer.
Yes.
Right. So the answer is yes, they still have rights. And yes, there should be a way for them to still get resources, hopefully through the district, even if their school homeless liaison isn't as accessible. Okay. So I think that hopefully that answered that person's question there. Someone asked, I don't know, maybe you all know about this. Is their school district released iPads and laptops for students for virtual learning? But if it's damaged or not returned, parents are held accountable. Does anyone know how homeless students could be helped pay for insurance to cover if lost, broken, or damaged, or if there's any kind of, I mean, things happen, right? I think we've all broken a cell phone or a computer. Like, is there any sort of backup so that people aren't left with the bill for those expensive products?
Well, can I just say that they can't be left with that? That would be considered a barrier. So what the school district does about that, whether they have insurance for that or they have a fund for that in some way, maybe Norma or Estella can talk about how that works within their school district, but it would definitely be a barrier if we were trying to hold accountable homeless students for that kind of money.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jean. For example, I had a student in a shelter and had to be removed by CPS from the shelter, and the student had to leave all her belongings, and then we couldn't find a textbook that was very expensive. So the school would not release the records because the student owed a book. So I had to contact the campus and then let them know that we couldn't do that. We had to, and also reached out to the administration office, to the person in charge of those textbooks, and they were able to waive the fee. So it's just finding the person who can waive the fee at the district level, but we cannot not enroll a student because they have unpaid bills, or not provide them with another textbook because they lost one. It is, most of the time, it's out of their control. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's part of the law that you can't allow unpaid fees to interfere with enrollment or attendance at school, you know.
That makes a lot of sense. I think there was another question about this whole summer. I'm going to read the question, and maybe this would be best for Jean also. And Estella, I'm going to find one for you. So
That's okay.
Don't worry. Okay. Does a child maintain McKinneyVento status over the summer until status can be re-verified? So the question is, when they re-enroll and identify as homeless, are they automatically considered McKinneyVento until the status can be confirmed?
Yes. So once they enroll, they maintain that status throughout the school year, and that's even if they become permanently housed. They still have that status for that school year. And then the next year, you're identifying again. And so I just want to talk a little bit about identification versus verification. So every year there should be identification of all returning students, all new students. And sometimes we'll hear from school districts, well, we only do the student residency questionnaire with students we think might be homeless. That's verification, but that's not according to the law. It really has to be every student is identified every year. So they have it throughout the school year, even if they become permanently housed during that school year. And then the next year you're identifying again.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to say, Gabriella, who's another expert on this at Appleseed, wrote in our chat that another person they could try is the regional homeless liaison, like if they couldn't get a hold of their district. So Estella, can you talk about what that is? Because I'm not sure everyone knows like what the regional homeless liaison is. You just briefly explain.
Sure. The state of Texas has 20 regional educational service centers. And every school district falls under certain umbrella. For San Antonio, it's Region 20. Region 20 has identified a homeless liaison for the region. And from there, then they put, they organize and coordinate meetings as well as trainings and things like that for the liaisons in the region. And that really certainly does provide a lot of support for the homeless liaisons within the region. We all know who we are and we can communicate with each other, and we have those kinds of conversations and trainings that are very pertinent to our jobs and how we can do it. So there's a lot of sharing and personal growth, or learned from best practices from other people. So it's a great convening time.
Okay, yes, thank you so much. So one other question. Well, I think this goes in what we were just saying. So I'm going to ask this, and then I'm going to go to the one that I keep skipping, which is that cannot hold. Basically, I think the person's saying like you can't hold diplomas for late or damaged fees for homeless students either, right? And I think the question is, that's correct. You cannot hold the diplomas.
You cannot.
Okay. And then if I have a 3-year-old client that is eligible for the 3-year-old pre-K program, does the parent need to go through the school registrar or through the homeless student liaison? Does anyone know that answer?
Well, eventually they'll have to go through registration, but they might want to connect with the liaison first so that they can help them navigate the system. Norma, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. Like they have to register at that campus through the registrar, but then they have to work with usually the registrar will make the referral to the liaison to reach out to the family for extra services and support.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So one other question was that somebody is in search of updated posters. The ones that they have their district are very old. So I was curious how y'all got a hold of updated posters, so you could tell that person.
Them through our regional liaison at the region.
Okay.
She delivered the posters to us. So I know they reach out to the Techi Center. They should be able to mail you some posters.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also a link that you could download and print some posters yourself, I believe.
Okay, maybe we'll try and send that link. So we'll send a recording of the webinar, Norma's video, and a link to download the posters. Okay, they just got one more question. It says, sadly, the school district my children attended did withhold the high school diploma for unpaid balances. So I guess this is when this is happening. This person said that they filed a complaint with TEA and the school district was contacted and they started to release them, but then we're holding the transcript until the balance was paid. Does anyone have any suggestions of who they can contact for more help?
Well, first and foremost, I would have gone through the homeless liaison because there should be funds either in Title I or if they have a McKinneyVento grant that they could pay that balance for that student. But what they're doing is really not within the law to do that. But I would go through the homeless liaison first and have them work within the district to see what they can find for funding to pay for that unpaid balance.
Yeah, that is definitely not supposed to happen, and definitely, especially, you know, a child that has had challenges being homeless and has gotten their high school diploma,
Right.
that is already a feat.
Yes.
And then also, you know, well, who is the liaison for the district? Call your district offices and just ask for the homeless liaison. If they can't answer that question, then go to TEA.
Yeah.
And if that person, whoever asked that question, if that continues to be a problem, please feel free to reach out to me personally. My email is on the Appleseed website, and we're gonna actually move to the slide that has all our contact information. And you'll be able to, I'd be happy to help you with something like that.
Right.
So I think we're gonna wrap up. Norma, Estella, Jean, thank you so much. I think your insights and expertise were really valuable. And I know that this webinar was just the start of exploring all that you know on this topic. So I really appreciate your time and sharing with everyone. And if we could just go to the contact slide, just so that people have a minute to see that before we wrap up. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add before we close?
Well, just that anybody who'd like to send me an email if you have a question, don't hesitate to do that. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, Jean has a wealth of experience, and I frequently, when I can't find the answer, call Jean, and she's always happy to help. So do take her up on that. And yeah, thank you so much. Here's all of our information. We look forward to hearing from you. If this webinar was something that was really helpful, please let us know. We'd be happy to plan more. If you have ideas of something that would be helpful for you to know, tell us. We'd be happy to find other experts or bring back the same folks and provide that information to you. So thank you so much. And with that, I will say have a good day.